This is some joint research that I have been doing in recent times together with 3 co-authors. So everything I say is related to work we have done together. Well, in particular, Matthias Döpke and I have been working on the issue of family economics in general, and more specifically of parenting in recent times. And the parenting style, more precisely, is the subject of investigation for people in the area of child psychology. We have taken somehow, we built on that knowledge, but we have taken a different angle. So rather than trying to assess what parenting style works better, the word parenting style goes back to the work of Diana Baumri in the late 1960s, and this distinction between authoritarian parenting, authoritative parenting, permissive parenting, possibly neglecting parenting. So child development psychology has studied a lot the behavior of parents using these categories. We take a different perspective in which parenting style is a choice. You know, in the end, what economists do most of the time is to regard the behavior of people as coming from some choice. And so we take the view that the environment influence, you can think of a rational choice, you can think of an adaptive behavior. It influences the way parents behave. So it's not just that parents are attached to some culture, and then these cultures differ across the world, and so we see some results. No, we think that that is, of course, part of the story, but another important part of the story is that the economies differ. So, in a traditional society, a certain way of bringing up children works well. In a more industrialized society, that changes. Where there is more inequality or more social mobility, it changes yet again. So our previous work has been focusing on the upbringing, especially of smaller children. So we have written a book, and take the freedom to advert it. We have just had the paperback edition in English. It has also been translated. It was yesterday that I learned that the Japanese edition is out. And so, this is something, of course, in which we build upon. But today I'm going to talk about the upbringing and the parenting involving older children. So I'm thinking more of teenagers. And of course, the relation between parents and children and teenagers presents different challenges. Many of us have been through it, probably finding it not always the easiest experience. When children become teenagers, there is another very important influence. Also small children are affected by their friends, but friendships are a less focal concept relative to relationship with parents. So peers become very important. There is a huge literature out there in economics, in sociology, about peer effects. So what I'm going to talk about today is the relationship between parenting and peers, because most of the decisions that parents take about teenager is to try to influence peer effects. If you think about residential choice, so when you think about moving to a certain area because there is a good school, because good peer environment, that's especially here in the United States, but also I know in China this is a very prominent issue. So that's something that parents do all the time, and also condition on where they live. They can exercise some type of influence, trying at least to influence their way their children interact with peers, and that will be actually more specifically the topic of today. Since this is all about changes in the environment and how these affect the response of parents and how these affect peer effects, it's natural to think about the enormous change in the environment that we have witnessed in the last year. So during the pandemic time, a lot of things have changed. Children, small or grown up, are at home many more hours. In fact, they cannot take, in many cases, instruction in school. schools have remained closed for a substantial amount of time. This has an effect on, how parents can and should try to help their children, but also on the type of peers that children are exposed to. So that will be the second part of my talk today. So the first part, I'm going to present a paper that we wrote actually before the pandemic. And this is it takes a village, and this is the backbone of the more recent paper where we study the effect of COVID. So I cannot explain the second paper without talking about the first. So let me explain what we do in the paper title. It takes a village. So we develop a model of parenting with peer effects. So this is a structural model. It's a dynamic rational choice model, borderline between macroeconomics and labor economics. That has some echoes of our own work, the work of Jim Hackman, and also the work that Yves Denou and others have been doing that has also influenced a lot our thinking. So it's a model where children grow up in different neighborhoods, environments. It's not a model of choice of neighborhood, which is in our agenda the next thing we want to do. So people live somewhere, they have already made a choice perhaps, and in that place they respond to the environment they face. This is a theory where the process of peer formation and parenting style are mutually interdependent equilibrium outcomes. So we have information, as I'll say in a moment, about who the friends are of each child, and we have the information about what type of parenting each child is subject to. And we're going to use those two, and we're going to postulate through our theory that there is some interaction. And just to fix the idea at the outset, if a parent lives in a difficult environment that is conflictive, where there are children coming from troubled family, well, the first instinct is to warn the child about certain type of interaction, to worry about some phenomenon in which he or she can get involved. So that's the type of logic in our thinking. So we present a model, we estimate the model using the information I said about parenting style and friendship networks, and then we do some policy counterfactors. So when you have a structural model, the beauty of that is that you can think about interventions that affect some particular parameters or the environment where people act, and then study the response of the equilibrium response of the population. So one of the things we did in this first paper is to study the effect of busing policies, sometimes called disaggregation busing policies. So moving children from disadvantaged neighborhood to other neighborhood. These policies have been studied, and Chetty and others have written a series of fantastic papers. But what we can do with the aid of the model is to predict what would happen if you scale up the intervention. That's something that reduced form approach does not really allow, because there is no distinction between effect with small scale and large scale policy. Okay, so this is the data set we use. It's a data set we are not the first to use, so this is not the novelty of the contribution. It's called AdHealth, and it samples 144 public and private schools that are representative for the US. The shortcoming is these are data from the 1990s. We are not aware of any more recent data set that has the information we need. So many things could be said about this data set. Let me focus on the dimension I'm interested in. There is an in-school survey that concerns 90,000 adolescents in grades 7 to 12. So these are high school children. And we get information about the friendship network within school. So we know for each child who the close friends are, and by own declaration. So by the child declaring, these are my best friends around here. And we have information about the academic performance of children. And then there is an in-home survey that subsamples, where the subsample is of the order of 21,000 people, where we also have information about parental involvement and the parenting style to which children are subject to. And this is the new dimension that we introduced to the study. Others have before us exploited this friendship and peer effects alone. So to go straight to the main point, there are many information actually about parenting styles, and the first thing we did was to see that in our book, Matthias and I look at how parenting style varies across countries, and we relate the extent of income inequality or the competitiveness of the schooling system to how parents behave at home. So if you have like sharper incentives, if it's more important to perform well in schools, we see that parents tend to respond by being pushier, spending more time with children. If like in Scandinavia, you have a more of a relaxed attitude, more team-oriented type of approach in school, then parents are more relaxed and emphasize other values like imagination, independence, etc. So the first thing we find is that across the school in the United States, the same type of pattern is observed, and we were very excited when we saw it because people have sometimes quibbles about the validity of cross-country regressions. Well, we found very close reproduction of these patterns when we look at schools. So parents tend to be more relaxed in environments that are characterized by less inequality, less diversity, etc. But here I want to focus to zoom on one particular aspect of this. So this is how much parents intervene in children's selection of peers. So let me focus on this particular question. And again, there are many more questions that are interesting about parenting style. The question is, do your parents let you make your own decisions about the people you hang around with? Now we classify as non-authoritarian parent when the child responds yes. Sorry, when the child responds do the parent, let you make. So when the parents respond yes, then it's non-authoritarian. When the parent responds, when the child responds yes, is non-authoritarian. When the child responds no, is authoritarian. Now, we have had some discussion, especially outside economics, because they say, well, why would this be a sign of authoritarian parenting style? Our approach in the earlier work is that authoritarian doesn't mean that necessary, disciplines children in a harsh way. That can happen, but it's mostly about allowing children to make free choice or not. So an authoritarian parent tries to interfere with the free choice, and this is a sense in which we see mingling with the choice of friends as a manifestation of an authoritarian parenting style. I could tell you that this also correlates nicely with a number of other questions that reflect whether parents are authoritarian in a more traditional sense. But today I'm going to speak specifically about this question. So in our sample, about 16% of parents are authoritarian about friends. Where are parents more authoritarian? Well, we see them being more authoritarian in neighborhoods where the median family income is low, which is the left graph, the left panel, and in neighborhoods where there is more inequality in academic achievement. That's a dimension in which we measure the outcome variable. So this is a bin scatter plot. It's not that we have so few observations. We have 1,000 observations, as I said, but we attach people to bins according to the place where people live. So we look at the family income, and the median family income at school is on the horizontal in the first, and the family income 90-10 ratio, so a measure of inequality is in the second one. So when there is more inequality, parents tend to be more authoritarian. When there is more poverty, parents also tend to be more authoritarian. Now, this is, of course, still a bit of a correlation that can hide a lot of heterogeneity, but it holds true. It's a very stubborn type of pattern. It holds true no matter how far and how deep you go into communities. So, for instance, here is a regression, which is not the main point of our paper, that we will present a model, but it's a nice motivational regression, which uses the methodology that was promoted by Carol Oxby. So essentially, take a school, so control for school fixed effect, look within the school and look at the variation in quality across cohorts within the same school, and think that that is random. So, okay, so in 1 year you have a cohort where there are more problematic children. The next year the cohort has fewer of those problematic children. That's the type of variation you use. And the first, so here we measure as outcome variable the propensity of parents to be authoritarian about friends, and we regress it on the mean GPA within grade, which is the left panel I showed before, and it shows that poorer neighborhood calls for more authoritarian parenting style. And the second, it looks at the standard deviation of GPA within grade, and it shows that more inequality is associated with higher propensity to be authoritarian. And then we control for a variety of we add control variables. All these regression have school fixed effect. And when you do the horse race, you see that the one that is particularly robust and resilient is actually the second coefficient. So it seems that parents tend to be more authoritarian, conditioning on the level of the school when there is a lot of inequality. And again, this exploits the variation across cohorts. Okay, so this is in the paper. We also have a number of other stylized facts that I will not have the time to discuss, because I want to take you through the paper now, through the model now. Okay, so this is a model where there are parents and children, and there is some type of initial heterogeneity in child skills that define the peer environment. This varies across schools, and the school, for the moment, later I will tell you something else, but the school district is the environment. So the peer environment is what type of children are in your cohort and when you enter high school. The parent make two decisions. The first is whether to be authoritarian or non-authoritarian, defined before. And the second is what we call authoritative time investment. So we know how many hours parents spend with their children, and we say that this is a measure of this type of investment. The word of the label authoritative is to remind us of our previous work, perhaps. So don't pay terrible attention. But this is time in helping children with homework and supporting them. So it's a type of activity that is not just leisure. And then there are children make decision. These are decisions about who to be friends with, and the parental behavior can influence that choice. So in the end, and this is all the spirit also of our earlier work, is that children make some choice. So you cannot necessarily decide yourself for the children. You can try to influence them. Okay, an important piece. The model has several pieces. I'm going to focus on those that I regard as most essential to understand the result. The first is the so-called technology of skill formation, which has a flavor of it's actually very related to what Jim Hackman, Fabio Cunha, Amosto, and others have been doing. So this is a dynamic, the process of skill formation is a dynamic cumulative process where children accumulate at different stage of their upbringing, accumulate skill, building on the skill accumulated in the earlier stages. So here we are going to just look at the high school cycle. So children enter high school with some academic skills, and some choices and some interaction make these children better, acquire more knowledge over time. So this is a production function. You see, it has a structure of CES production function. it's a nested CES production function. The first term, AT, looks like a total factor productivity for those like me, accustomed to think in terms of growth theory. Let's see what is inside, what are the input of this technology of skill formation. So this is theta I t+1 on the left, is the level of skill, think in terms of GPA or knowledge more generally. The child has a t+1. Well, it depends on the state of the child at time t. So if you are a proficient at time t, more likely to be proficient at time t+1, that's an input to the process. Two other inputs here are important. The first is a peer effect, which is measured by some average achievement across the friends, and then there is the parental investment. And then there is, you see, this nested CES structure where there are some important terms that are elasticity of substitution. For instance, we can first distinguish it's nested because here it's like the own input, the current stock is the own input of the child, and I would call peer effects and parental investment like the external inputs. So these external inputs, they have some type of elasticity of substitution that is important to know about. For instance, if there is a substitution between, if alpha 3 is positive, then parents intervene more and spend more time when the peer environment is poor. That will be a feature of the estimation, as you will see. If the sum coefficient is negative, then instead we have complementarity. If they are close to 0, when we are in a Cobb-Douglas environment. And then there is a total factor productivity. Now, here's an important tenet of our theory. Parents choose this parenting style, being authoritarian and authoritarian, that affects the entire technology. So if you are an authoritarian parent, this affects the total factor productivity. We conjecture in a negative way because you have a worse relation with your children. Children don't trust you, and the estimation will confirm that. But it also affects all the elasticity of substitution because the way children absorb the input is also determined. And this high level of flexibility, you might wonder why didn't you go for a more parsimonious model? Well, because the data would reject that. The data show very sharp differences between the parents who choose to be authoritarian and not. So you should think that when you choose to be authoritarian, you are aware of a lot of consequences that comes from that. You become a different type of family, you become a different type of parent. The process of peer formation is modeled as a random utility model, where in each period t, peer groups are formed, children live in a certain environment, and then there is a random utility model that determines whether they want to establish a friendship tie with another child. And that will depend on the characteristic of the own child, the characteristic of the other child, on the behavior of the parent, and on some, elements that are random to us. The typical shock in a random utility model that captures, I really like the child, not because he's smart, not because of anything, it's just because I like the child. That's the logic. And that determines whether a child wants to establish a tie with another child. Of course, it has to be going both ways. And we assume that a tie is formed only when both children agree on that tie. So if I want to be friend of Lorenzo, but Lorenzo doesn't really like me, that we are no friends. That's what it is. But in reality, he likes me and we are friends. So that's... Okay, so friendship requires mutual agreement. Now, I'm not going to show you all the detail, but when we estimate, we allow two important characteristics. The first is the so-called homophily bias. It's something that it has been documented in this literature on peer network. Children tend to more easily form friendship with children of their own sort. And their own sort here means with similar academic achievement. And our estimate confirmed that pattern. The other part that is new is that if parents are authoritarian, that imposes a penalty on friendship with lower skilled children. And we assume that the lower the skill of the potential friend, the larger the penalty. And we estimate that. Perhaps you could say, well, sometimes people think this, you cannot condition that. Well, then we let the model say that coefficient is small, that effect is small, and in fact it turns out it's not. So Behind this, there are parents, and parents have some have a utility function. In fact, a dynamic one. They care about the first term, this U. It's the utility of family life today. It's a function of a variety of things, but most notably, there are two choice variables, which are the parenting style. The first is whether you are authoritarian or not, and the second is how much time you spend with your children. To be authoritarian, I would say, tends to be a nasty thing. It's the easiest thing with your children to let them do what they like. So we allow for the possibility of a penalty in the life of the family. And again, we estimate the model could tell us there is no penalty. The second is that it's costly to spend time with children. So parents do it because they know it's productive and because they have an altruistic element in their choice. Now, this altruistic element is a combination of tough altruism and proper altruism, or paternalism and altruism. Let me not get too much into that, but let me say the following. Parents want that their children do well in school because they know this is conducive to doing well in life, and our parents care about children. And that's the reason why somehow they try to influence the process of skill acquisition. Okay, so what happens when we estimate the model? Well, we apply the method of simulated moment, and what are the targets of this? Well, we run a bunch of regressions. These regressions are by construction misspecified if you believe in our model, because they ignore all the various selection processes. But those regressions are informative. So, for instance, you run a regression of parenting style on child and peer skill. Important, we run it within school and grade. So it's within school and within grade. So it's a very, very finely graded variation. We run a regression of the next period skills on child and peer skills. So all these have the kind of reduced form regression that would naively derive from our model. Those have coefficients, and those coefficients become the target of our estimation. And we use the method of simulated moment with an indirect inference method to make sure that the parameters of the structural model go as close as possible to those observed regression coefficients. That of no structural interpretation, but if you then run a regression with our specification of the model, you would get those reduced form regression. It's again something that other people have done before us. Okay, so we are going. So I'm not going to show you goodness of fit result. We were pretty happy with those. I'm going to show you later some untargeted moments. So what we regard here as untargeted is anything that goes across schools, across neighborhoods. So our model identify everything by looking at moments within school and grade. It's not obvious that this would give you good predictive power about the distribution of, for instance, behavior of parents across schools in the United States. And it turns out that it does a good job. I'll show you later a picture. But let me first comment on some of the estimation, because they are going to be useful also to understand what comes later. So technology. Remember the skill technology that I gave you before. And remember that I allow the authoritarian parent to be associated with a complete different technology. In fact, it turns out that for those parents, the Cobb-Douglas approximation is very good. So the coefficient you estimate in the unrestricted formulation are very close to those of Cobb-Douglas. The elasticity would be unity, and those parameters that I showed before would be close to zero somehow. So an authoritarian parenting style, first is like a Cobb-Douglas, and second, it has a lower total factor productivity. So there is a cost, as we somehow could have imagined before, in being authoritarian. It reduces somehow the ability of the child to positively absorb the input of that technology. What about the non-authoritarian? Non-authoritarian, first of all, have a higher TFP, already said, but also there are two important characteristics. Child skill and other inputs are complements. So that means that when the child is good, as a high skill, it's going to be very responsive to the intervention of parents. So parents would have actually an incentive to spend more time with the child. And the second is that peer and parents are substitutes. So parents are going to intervene more, spend more time when the peer environment is problematic, if they behave in an authoritarian way. An alternative way is to be authoritarian. But if they are non-authoritarian, then they have to spend a lot of time, because you don't want to force your child to do certain things, and at the same time, the child is not exposed to good influences. So this looks quite intuitive. Okay, so the second thing is the peer formation process. We find a strong homophily, which confirms other studies, so I won't comment much on that. But also the authoritarian parenting style turns out to be effective, which is quite interesting. So when you look at, you could think that parents may try to be authoritarian, to tell children not to do certain things. Well, from the perspective of the model, actually, this causal effect is quite substantial. So the probability of friendship for an average child with a child that is one standard deviation below the mean of skill is reduced by something like 35%. So the model asks for a significant effectiveness of the authoritarian parenting style. And remember, our parents are not authoritarian because they are, less aware of the modern finding of the child psychology literature. They respond to the environment. But of course, their response also implies an externality of the others, because the other children that are somehow sheltered from the contact with better children are going to suffer because of that. So let me highlight this trade-off. That yes, it's a bit like a limitation, if you want, but definitely we think that non-cognitive skills are important. They are conducive. The literature has shown a lot about that. So I want to firm up the intuition, to say, that when parents decide whether or not to be authoritarian, they face the following trade-off. There's improvement in the peer selection if they are authoritarian, but there is a reduction in the productivity of the skill formation technology. So when parents have an incentive, two parents have an incentive to be more authoritarian. Well, first of all, when the own child has low skill, because there is not much to ruin anyway. So it's sad to say, but that's what it is in our technology. And the second is when there is a high likelihood of that children befriend low skill peers. Now, if you put these two things together, it's parents in poor neighborhood that are more likely to be authoritarian. And when you look at the prediction of the model across neighborhood, here we create 4 bins of neighborhood in terms of different, which are associated to different income levels. So neighborhood 1 is the poorest, neighborhood 4 is the richest. So we map first, academic outcome into income. We look at the correlation in the data, and then I show you this graph, and you see the model. Both the model and the data reproduce a declining proportion of authoritarian parenting. So parents are more authoritarian in poor neighborhoods for the reasons that I told you before. Now, we have one such graph for any of the outcome variables or the intermediate variables of the model, but I won't have time to show you. So this is perhaps the most intuitive to show. And you see, in general, we do pretty well in describing, given our model, how life is in different neighborhoods, in different schools in this economy. Okay, so what happens if you move a child from a neighborhood like, actually, we are going to take neighborhood 2 and make a child in this fictitious neighborhood, representative fictitious neighborhood, to neighborhood 4. In fact, it turns out that, given that Matthias and I live in different type of environment, I live in a poor neighborhood and he lives in a rich one, that it's like to move a child from New Haven to Evanston. So what happens if you move a child from New Haven to Evanston? Well, first of all, we can simulate the model and see what happens if you move a child in isolation. If you move a child in isolation, the effect is going to be significant. And how big? Well, about as big as what we find in, once we do the appropriate mapping in experimental evidence. For instance, there is a study that looks at destroying houses in a poor part of Chicago, and then children are moved to different environments. And if you look at their estimates, our estimate is in the ballpark. It's a little higher. Actually, we are almost 50% higher, to tell you the whole story. So you could say that our peer effects are a little bigger than what people normally find. But it's not that they are 3 times bigger or 10 times bigger. They are just up to 50% larger than this experimental evidence. And we could discuss for what reasons. So they are somehow realistic. But the interesting part that you can do here is not to reproduce those results. You could do it in a type of reduced form evidence, and Chetty Andren have done all those things. Well, it's because we can see what happens if instead of moving one child, you move many children at the same time. What happens when you move many children at the same time? Well, many things happen. First of all, because of the homophily bias, those children tend to hang around together. And second, those children generate some type of response in the receiving community in terms of parenting style. So if you receive one child coming from a disadvantaged area and it's part of a large group, most likely it won't affect the behavior of parents. Parents may even be kind of understanding and encourage children to interact because, it's going to be just one child among many. But when 50% of the class is represented by disadvantaged children, then things change. We see it, even in Switzerland, where we have areas where there is a very high concentrated presence of minorities, of immigrant community. You see that affects the behavior of the parents of the local children. And so there's an unfortunate implication of this is that the effectiveness of the policy deteriorates as you move more children at the same time, because children tend to stick together, because parents tend to respond in a different way. And you see that the effect, the beneficial effect that we have when you move only one child, which is on the left corner here, essentially it's cut by half when you move a large number of children. Okay, so I could tell you more of disentangle the various components of this, but I want to spend my last 10 minutes to talk about COVID. So let me skip a couple of other. We do a number of other counterfactual experiments, like trying to curb inequality, curb residential desegregation, and I think that have also some interesting insights. But I want to spend the last part of my presentation in talking about COVID shock. So what is COVID for us? Well, the first thing is schools are closed. So schools are closed for some periods. And we already have some preliminary evidence about the effect of this, at least on cognitive skills in different countries, in Belgium, in the Netherlands. We can also look at the effect during summer breaks. There is some loss of knowledge. So we have some ballpark estimate about what the effect of just not having in-school activity could be. But this is actually the title. It's about the great equalizer, which is the expression by Horace Mann, the great reformer in the 19th century. Okay, so, but there are more things that happen when school closes, and somehow the model gives us our previous study gives us some hint on those. So there is a loss of in-person teaching, but there is also loss of contact with some friends. There is a change in the peer environment, and I'll have something to say about that. There is also yes. So essentially, what you're thinking is that when you are in school, when there are schools are open, children meet with all the people in the school district. Now, in the United States, schools are very segregated. It's regarded as a big concern, but still, that segregation is not as bad as it is at the block level. So if you look at a school, it includes children that come from different instructions. So if we believe, and here it's where we have to make an assumption because we don't know, that interactions become more local when schools close down, well, then we can consider that as a change in the peer environment. And imagine that change is from the school district to the block. And now we look at the median family income, and we look at them by census block. So to the left, the poorest, to the right, the richest. And then we look at the mean skills. Oh, this is from Ad Health data. It's not data of COVID. These are data from the 1990s again. But we see that there is a significant increase in sorting. So the red steeper line represents a regression line across this binner plot, where you see that there is a very high correlation between the median family income and the mean skills and the quality of the peer environment, when the unit of interaction is the census block. When it's a school, it's also positive, but it's less steep. So somehow the environment becomes more unequal. For the poorest family, that they live already on average in poor area, but their children interact with somewhat better off children in schools. And now they only interact with children in their own block. Then they have a worse peer environment. Actually, the opposite happens for the richest kids. They already live in a rich neighborhood, but moreover, their block is typically richer than the average in the school district. Something else that we emphasize is that there is an effect on academic performance that I think is novel, something novel that we find in losing contact with friends. It's interesting that in the Ad Health we have information about children who drop out of the sample and then they go we don't know where, but we know what the effect is on children who stay. It turns out that systematically having a children who drop out of the school and move maybe to another neighborhood or for whatever reason has a systematic, not very, very statistically very significant, but quantitatively sizable. So it's a bit noisy in estimation, but marginally statistically significant, sometimes clearly statistically significant on the performance of the remaining child. So something that we didn't know, that if you lose a friend, you do worse in school. Okay, something else that happened during COVID is that parents have to spend more time with their children. And we know by how much. Some studies show us that. Also, we know that the possibility for parents to respond to the shock is very much socially stratified. So when children, the main reason for that, it's telecommuting. So telecommuting, so the possibility of working remotely from home, is, for us, it's we do everything online. So I'm too old, I don't have small children, but if I have a small child, that would of course make it easier for me to help the small child. I could also use my knowledge because I am an academic or whatever, but it's also the time endowment that would be there. If I take instead a person working in a place where they have to commute, and now commuting facilities have become, commuting time, if anything, increased in some cities. Well, those parents now they face an increasing demand for helping their children. Probably their children not even have a computer at home, at least not enough computers as they would be needed. And in addition, parents are not there as much as requested. Here is how you see it in the data. If you look at pre-COVID time, this is American Time Use Survey, there is a positive correlation in the time parents spend with their children relative to income. It's also correlated with education, so that part of this can be education that is correlated with income. But there is a significant positive correlation. But if you look at during COVID time, it becomes much steeper. Okay, so here is how we introduce all these things in the model. Number one, we assume that COVID has the effect of a reduction in the total factor productivity in the skill formation technology, because in-person teaching is more productive for everybody than remote learning. Second, the peer environment moves from school to census block, and that becomes more sorted, more segregation. Number three, parents must invest a minimum time endowment to replace teachers. So, in order to achieve the usual level of productivity, parents first have to spend some time in just helping the children with the basic. We see actually that if you look at the average, it goes up big time. So the childcare time has gone up by a factor of 4 to 5. We don't know how comparable these two numbers is, because American Time Use Survey is consistent across different periods. This is a study that looks great, but I don't know if that survey replicates that. So I'm not super confident about that number, although in the end we target it. But I'm confident about the slope. I just want to mention that with this caveat, there is evidence that parents spend more time with children, and that's probably not surprising. And the other important thing is that parents have time constraints that are different. So some parents have more time now and some parents have less time. We have a time budget in the model already in the basic model, but we assume that time budget is the same for everybody. Now, time budget becomes different for different families. So what would you expect to happen when schools are closed? Well, there is a fall in productivity, and in addition, there is a deterioration in the peer environment for the poorest children. Now, parents, we would expect that parents respond more in the difficult environments because now their children are exposed to the danger of the not so good interaction that prevail at their own block level. In fact, if we didn't add any other constraint, that is what would happen. We'll see parents trying to remedy to that effect more in the poor than in the rich neighborhoods. Unfortunately, the time endowment is different, and that's related to the extent of telecommuting. So, as I show you, that actually generates a reversal. The reversal is that the wealthier families can respond, and the less wealthy family can respond less. Now, all of this perhaps makes sense in qualitative terms, but we try to tie our hands with the best estimates we have. So, for instance, the average learning losses, there is a study on Belgian data, we target that number. For the peer environment, it's the figures that I've shown you before. So we assume, it's a little of a speculation, but we think it's not too crazy, that interaction move from the school level to the block level. We take the work flexibility arrangement, in particular the inequality, also the level from Adams, Prassel et al. Study. So these are targets of our, so this somehow discipline the extent and the nature of the shock that we introduce in the model. So apart from that, we believe in the estimates from the previous studies. We cannot estimate the entire process of skill accumulation because we don't know what's going to happen next year or in 2 years from now. So we believe that the estimates we have for the 1994 sample are still valid here, except that we add constraints to the model that we reconstruct the type of situation that we have during COVID, during time of school closure. What do we do with that? Two things. Number one, I'm going to tell you how much inequality in academic achievement increases. And second, I'm going to tell you how persistent that increase is. So let me start with the bottom line, because this is probably the most important graph. And if I have 2 minutes, I will tell you something about the decomposition. You see the skills in, this is the skills in grade 10. It's a logarithmic measure on the vertical. So approximately, I should be more precise, but essentially very, very good approximation is to think that minus 0.1 means a 10% loss of academic achievement that you could measure by GPA. Okay, so for the richest children on the right, there is no change. In fact, for the very, very rich, their peer environment becomes better, and the parents have a lot of time to spend to them. It's insignificant, but if anything, there's slight improvement. Some children claim that they're learning more remote. But for the most disadvantaged children, there's a very different reality. Their peer environment is now much worse. Their parents cannot respond. They lose actually 60% of their cognition. If we map that to GPA, it's like an average fall of half a point in a GPA scale, where going from A to B is 1 point, to be clear. Okay, so it's pretty significant. So suppose that schools reopen after 1 year of closure, of disruption. Well, after that, the normal activity is resumed. So the schools start promoting more mixing. Parents have stopped having these heterogeneous budgets. But at the end of the cycle, this is the picture for a child in 9th grade is hit by the shock, and then the shock is gone, and the following year, the normal dynamic of the model works. There's still 50% of the academic achievements are lost for the most disadvantaged children, and essentially nothing. There's a little of loss also for the richest. Why? Well, this comes through the spillover that you know, children start interacting, as there are children in every neighborhood who have some loss of cognition. You can think about school teachers have to actually slow down their activity, but it's not a large loss. It's in the order of 10%. So it's 3 times bigger in percentage term for the poorest children. And if you map that to a number in terms of earnings, it corresponds to 25% loss in labor earnings. You know, if you look at what this 30% loss means, that's what it is. And again, here is the decomposition. My time is soon over, but you see the less academically. So in this picture, you see how the less academically. So in this picture, you see the effect of COVID on shutdown on peers' quality. So those who suffer most for the deterioration of the peer environment are the children in the poorest neighborhood. This is the response of parents. And you see the richest parents have more time and respond more. If I showed this without the heterogeneous time constraint, it would slope the other way around. So it would have actually that the parents who would like to help more are the parents who live in disadvantaged area, but they can't. And this is actually not remedied over time because you know, the model has also this effect that once your children lose some skills, parents' effort becomes less productive. So this is also subject to some persistence. And the final thing I want to say is that parents become more authoritarian in the poorest areas, because in the poorest neighborhood, there is this growing exposure to less proficient children. So more and more parents turn authoritarian. Whereas there is no need for the richest parents to somehow turn more authoritarian. Turning authoritarian has a cost, both on productivity of their own skill formation technology, but also it has a negative externality on the environment. So this makes the poorest neighborhoods suffer more and more because parents don't really spend much more time. They can't initially, they don't later. More of them become actually authoritarian. And so over time, that is actually persistent. And the model predicts significant increase because you see the average, I told you the average share of parents who are authoritarian is 16 percentage point, 16%. And here there is an increase up to 14 percentage points in the poorest neighborhood. Now, admittedly, there are no data. It's not that I'm telling you this is what has happened. This is what would happen if you believe our model has predictive power, and if we have, you know, the way we have calibrated these shocks in COVID time make any sense. And I am over time. I want to finish here. You know, presented a model which accounts for the interaction between social environment, peers, peer groups, and parenting. We have used originally this model to evaluate the effect of scaling up some type of intervention like desegregation policy. And now we have used more recently this model to make some, we call it enlightened speculation over the effect of COVID. Of course, more data will be needed to see how precise it is. But I think that the thrust of the model makes me confident in saying, well, there is a very important element of growing inequality that is coming through the educational channel. And it's not only the number of computers that people have at home, it's also the way children interact with each other and the way children interact with their parents. Thank you.